passed. So our next presentation are to approve some funding agreements related to the 16th Street Mall. They are not contracts to do any work. They are just funding agreements. And it looks like our presenter will be Josh Laipply. And I will let you take it away.
Good afternoon, Council. I'm Josh Laipply. I'm the Chief Projects Officer for the Mayor. Welcome here today, and I did get the note, so I will be moving faster. So really there's three things in front of you today, and they are funding agreements. There is an intergovernmental agreement with RTD to accept funds from them and the Federal Transit Administration. It is an interagency agreement with Denver Water to accept funding from them as well. And then Councilwoman CdeBaca alluded to the Dura request, which is a change in the funding agreement, which just changes the amount of time in which we can receive those dollars and allocate those dollars. So on the agenda, we're going to talk through a little bit of what is the 16th Street Mall project, what is the 16th Street Mall, and then we'll get into the proposed funding agreements, which includes the IGA, the IAA, and the PFA with Dura. So just a brief overview. Many of you have probably been on the 16th Street Mall. It is kind of our red carpet for everyone that comes to the city, and it is our central business district. So it is our economic powerhouse for the city. 39,000 RTD mall riders daily, 145,000 workers, 27,000 residents, 198 businesses, 50% of which are locally owned, and 8,759 hotel rooms that are probably mostly vacant right now. Why are we talking about this? My background is bridge engineering, and in a bridge, we talk about it being functionally obsolete and structurally deficient, meaning how does it operate, and then what condition is it in? Right now, we've got both things happening on the 16th Street Mall. For an asset condition, we're not doing very well. If you've been out there, you can trip on pavers. Pavers are slick. We've got some issues with the substrate or the ground that's underneath those pavers that are frost heaving and changing the elevation of those pavers, which create a condition that's not safe. Right now, it's a 38-year-old mall. We haven't invested a lot in it in those 38 years, and we're spending about $1.5 million a year on just maintaining these failing pavers. Also, I talked about functional obsolescence. How does it function? How does it operate today? Well, if we're going to go out there and we're going to replace this asset condition of bad pavers and a bad substrate and old water lines that are underneath that, at the same time, let's look at how it's configured to see if we can make it safer. So can we open up those walkways? Can we move the buses to the middle and make a safer operating environment? Many of you have probably seen when people are out there and they're walking across, oftentimes there's some near misses with buses because people aren't paying attention, or they're too close in the pedestrian environment where they actually walk out onto the pathway where the buses travel. This would be an effort to consolidate that and give people more space to walk and move. So we've been through about a decade of planning, and this is my transition to Laura Aldrete, our Director of Planning, to kind of walk you through what that's looked like and all the efforts that have gone on to date. Do you want me to run this, or you got it?
Hi, good afternoon. Laura Aldrete. I'm the Executive Director of Community Planning and Development. Thank you for having us here today. I just want to remind you that the conversation I'll have with you today is around the public life. But the conversation before you today is really about the funding agreement. So I'm here just to remind you about what the aspiration is and where we'll be headed from a design standpoint for the mall. So that is, what Josh focused on is really from the granite pavers below the grade. And I really, of course, am focused on the public life in the public realm. And we have taken over the last 10 years to do an extensive amount of study for this project, everything from meet in the street to and observations about what that is, who we attract into the space, because what we have understood is that the mall functions more like a hallway from move to point A to point B at the ends of the mall, but it never has been a good place to be, whether it's for respite or intrigue or enjoyment. And so that's really how we understand good places to exist, is that we're comfortable sitting in them and being in them as opposed to moving through them. It's a little bit of how I think about the 20th century. We really focused on moving from point A to point B. We built a lot of highways. And I think this century is really about defining and making good places to be. And I think this is exactly what this project is about. So some of the things that we learned through the various studies that we did, as I mentioned, Meet in the Street, we had in partnership with the Downtown Denver Partnership, was that good activities and elements along the mall, we can really get people to sit. In fact, the thing that we're trying to do. And in particular, we saw an increase in the number of children and women on the mall as we counted people before and after that experience, those changes of programs and activities. In particular, we had 77% more children from the ages of 0 to 10 on the mall. So where does that lead us to? So we have done some initial conceptual planning that begins to respond to those ideas of creating activities and programs for people to be. This is an initial idea, but of course there's a lot of design work that we will work through to refine that. Additional greenery and planter elements will be key here, as well as vending kiosks, interactive art and play elements that really create an inviting place for both the residents of Denver, the metro, and for all folks of Denver, as well as visitors. It's the most popular visited, as I'm sure you know, it's the most popular visited attraction for folks coming to Denver. So I want to touch a little bit on the scale of public engagement that we have had over since 2010. Some of it has been just the downtown community coming together with the city to understand it, such as in the Mall Steering Committee, then having these meet in the streets and prototype festivals through 2010, 2016, and then moving through a variety of open houses where we're having conversations with visitors and residents in that space. Moving into the NEPA public meetings, of course this is a NEPA project, and so as a part of that process we've had those public meetings. And in this past year we've created a Champions Steering Committee that has met a number of times, and the focus there has been on the businesses and how do we make sure our construction is aligned with keeping those businesses as healthy as we can through that construction period. Of course, I think that conversation is ever more important considering what we have experienced as a city, in particular as a downtown, in the last 3 to 4 months. So lastly, just a couple additional considerations for you is we are continuing that design conversation technically and creating what we call a playbook, which is about what we understand about public spaces now is that they need to continually be evaluated to how they can best respond to the community. And so are we getting the right, are we making sure that we have a place for everyone to feel comfortable and enjoy, right? So checking on that. And so the ability to be able to adapt that over time. What I think happened initially is that the mall was delivered in the early 80s, and then we said we were done, and we walked away, and it operated as as a mall shuttle and a transit mall. And I think what we know now is that we continually have to evaluate the functionality of it and how we keep it engaging for for everyone for Denver. The second piece is the business supports aspects, which is creating, as I mentioned, the impacts that the mall reconstruction will have on small businesses, and that we will be developing a business support model similar to the BioFund, and to be deployed to keep those small businesses and local companies located there and thrive throughout the reconstruction.
So the next couple of pieces before we jump into finance is kind of the bathrooms and business of the mall. First, downtown public restrooms. This has been a big talking point for quite some time. We do have 2 sites potentially under consideration. We have $900,000 in wastewater funds that are allocated. And we've got a completed initial prototype study that we're already done with. So it kind of points us in the direction of what kind of facilities we would like to purchase and use. Just to be specific about where these restrooms happen contractually, they are not within the design build contract that will come in front of you months from now. They will be executed as a separate contract, partially because of the NEPA constraints and part of some of the study that we've been doing for the last 10 years on this part of the mall. But we are committed to that, and we do want to make sure that those are committed to in a harder fashion, such as a contract, prior to us starting on the mall. Environmental assessment, those of you that are familiar with the National Environmental Policy Act know that purpose and need is very important. So when you start these federal proceedings, you talk about what is the purpose and need. We talked about this already. We talked about fixing deteriorating infrastructure, both in the pavers and in the utilities that lie underneath that substrate, and then providing equitable and sufficient space for high-quality public gatherings, improving pedestrian vehicle safety. We talked about that functionality that happens on the mall today, and then continuing the reliable two-way transit shuttle. There's a lot of outdoor malls that started back in the 70s and 80s. This is one of the kind of shining gems of one that's been successful, and we attribute a lot of that to the free transit that's offered up and down the mall. With that NEPA procedures, they resulted in a finding of no significant impact, which was obtained in November of 2019. Project timeline, just to walk you through a little bit, we had a request for qualifications for proposers back in January of 2019. We completed the environmental phase in November of 2019. We have a short list as of February 2020. We already issued the request for proposals. We'll select a preferred design build contractor, and that will come in front of you. You will have to approve that contract with the design builder. That is not what this meeting is about. This meeting is about accepting funds from other places to help pay for this project. And then finally, in Q3, should you approve that contract, construction would begin. I'm going to turn it over to Emily Snyder to talk a little bit about the financial impacts of this mall.
Thanks, Josh. Good afternoon, members of council. Emily Snyder, Capital Budget Manager. First time talking through a mask, so hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm going to kind of run you through the economic impacts of the project itself. So capital investment has the capability to provide jobs and to stimulate the economy. Very critical in this time of higher unemployment and the need for economic recovery. So as such, our economist ran this particular project through an economic input-output model to understand what are the possible economic effects of this particular project. The model takes a statistical approach where it kind of aggregates about 90 government data sets, and it produces economic outputs across these 3 categories. So the direct effects are the companies that are directly hired to do the work, as well as that spending on the materials. The indirect effects are the companies farther down the supply chain. And then the induced effects are potentially as those companies grow and that income goes back into the economy, that output that is generated from that income. So the model right now is indicating that the 16th Street Mall project will provide up to 1,500 jobs, primarily across median wage occupations that you can see in the bar chart to the right. Associated with those jobs is income and the wages earned by those jobs. That totals $107 million. Then the associated sales with that income into the economy is $261 million. And here is basically the math across those three categories and those four outputs. All told, the project in and of itself is expected to generate about $3 billion of value add into our regional economy. This is a very similar metric to GDP and sort of the most comprehensive metric of economic output. And the best way that, as the economist was explaining to me, I was like, I need an example. So by way of an example, think about a construction employee hired to work directly on the mall project. That is a direct effect. That income that they receive is related to the labor income, and then they might take that income and go out and spend it on food, shelter, clothing, goods, toys for their kiddos. That same, farther down the supply chain, the mall tree grower, we have trees that we're growing so that their mature height maybe has to add additional forester to take care of those trees until such time they are implemented on the mall. They hire an additional person, that person has income, they spend that income through the economy. And the induced demand might be an additional employee at a food and beverage establishment on the mall that needs to staff up to serve the additional workers. All of that, jobs, income, spending into the economy, think trickle-down effect plus multiplier effect, is the 3.7 of value add. Now I'm going to shift into the funding agreements that are before you today. And before I touch there, I want to make sure that I'm kind of walking you through the full sources for the project. So to support the preliminary cost estimates, we have identified over $100 million in state, local, and federal sources, and this pie chart represents all of those. And just as the planning process has taken over a decade, we have been working to secure each of these pieces since as far back as 2012. The red section of the pie illustrates our local sources. This includes $13 million of voter-approved Elevate Denver bond funds, as well as a portion of the wastewater and annual capital improvement program, CIP. Those funds, the majority has already been appropriated. Those funds then leverage the rest of the pie. What is shown in yellow is the downtown TIF funds that is currently over half of what we use the term capital stack for the project. The agreement that Tracy will discuss a little bit more is to amend the timelines by which the city can access those funds. And then last is the green, affectionately termed other people's money. This is funding agreements to receive funds for the project. The local partnerships relates to the Denver Water IAA that I'll discuss a little bit more in a moment. The federal funds are the FTA, Federal Transit Administration funds for the transitway themselves, also a council action. And then last is the 15% of the pie that is state multimodal funds. That agreement will be before you later this summer. Those funds were awarded to us through they're the last piece of the pie, and they were awarded through the Dr. Cog transportation improvement process last year. 10 of that is regional funds, and 10 of it was funds that were allocated to the city through that regional process. We did apply for those funds with this full capital stack in place. So if a portion of the funding sources does go away, we will need to potentially revisit going back through the DRCOG board. Here are the 3 agreements. Why we're moving forward with these now really is to make sure that we are securing commitments to our grants, that we are showing progress to our grant partners, and that we have the funding in place as we enter into the design-build negotiations. A little bit more about the IGA with RTD. This is actually 2 grants that RTD received, one in 2012 and one in 2017, for rehabilitation and reconstruction of the mall. Through the EA, and as the city shifted into the position of delivering the project, we are now flowing those grant dollars to the city as a subrecipient. It is $12.8 million, 8.8 of those are the federal funds, with $1 million of associated match from RTD, and the RTD GM did sign this agreement in February. Next is the Denver Water IAA. It is for the receipt of almost a little over $5.4 million to complete waterline upgrades as part of the project. As often the case with utility providers, Denver Water is taking the opportunity to coordinate with the city, as we will have the street ripped up, so they want to take advantage. And also, there is efficiencies in having one contractor and one timeline out there as we're doing these capital improvements. So the city is performing work on Denver Water's behalf, and as such, they are going to be reimbursing us for the costs incurred to work on their asset. The work includes replacing 2 main lines, one from the 1880s, so very old, very, very old, with a single 16-inch main line, as well as some lead pipe abatement of the service lines that go to the adjacent businesses. The Denver Water Board voted on this IAA at their May 13th board meeting. Related to the Denver Water agreement, we will be establishing a new 38 fund and associated appropriation for use of those dollars. And now I'm going to turn it over to Tracy Huggins, and she will go through the Dura board funding agreement.
Thank you, Emily. Make sure I'm doing this. So I've had this conversation with many of you, so I'm going to make this just as brief as possible. My name is Tracy Huggins. I'm the Executive Director of the Denver Urban Renewal Authority. And as Emily mentioned, a good portion of the funding is expected to come from the tax increment that has been generated from various tax increment areas in downtown. Since it is such a significant component of the funding, thought it would be appropriate for me to give a little bit more context as to how it is we came to have those resources. So I'm going to take us back in time to 1992. Trust me, it's not going to be a step-by-step, year-by-year chronology of what has happened, but it's important to note that we started this effort with the city back in 1992 at a time when our downtown was vastly different than it is today. A significant number of surface parking lots in a 15-block property tax increment area, numerous buildings at threat of destruction because of their historic characterization and their vacancy, and Denver was experiencing a pretty much absolute and complete flight of retail from downtown. In addition, nobody lived downtown. Businesses were there, but at 5 o'clock, the sidewalks, as we've all heard, would roll up and everybody would just go to wherever they were, which wasn't downtown. And so the city recognized the importance of really putting some additional emphasis into our downtown, as it is our economic engine, and so worked with Dura to be able to invest in some strategic projects in order to make downtown a neighborhood, bring retail back to downtown, as well as to provide amenities to support the then newly constructed convention center, as well as the newly constructed 16th Street Mall. So there were 4 tax increment areas that were created over various points in time. All of the tax increment was used to make debt service on bonds that Dura had issued for purposes of repurposing the Denver Dry Goods Building, helping to bring forward the Mercantile Square project in lower downtown, the Denver Pavilions project, as well as what was then the Adams Mark Hotel, now the Sheraton. So as a result of our ability to refinance those bonds, as well as additional revenues that were generated as development happened over the years, we were able to repay those bonds in their entirety in 2013. You have heard me come before this body on other projects where we have represented that the tax increment area will terminate at the earlier of the statutory expiration, which is 25 years from when the tax increment area is created, or repayment of those obligations. That then would have meant that in 2013, we would have terminated the tax increment areas and all of the revenues would have then reverted to the normal taxing entities. However, if you recall that timeline, 2013 was right in the heart of those initial planning periods where the city, RTD, the partnership all realized the importance and the need for us to figure out a strategy to help address the needed reconstruction of the mall. So in concert with the administration as well as with City Council, we worked to amend those cooperation agreements to allow those tax increment areas to remain open to their statutory term, 2017 for one of them, 2020 for the remaining three, in order to allow us to take those monies and use them to invest in continuing strategic investments in and around downtown, including those that you see on the screen. Over $3 million went to Denver Public Schools to help with the delivery of the first elementary school downtown at their location at 1860 Lincoln, the Lawrence Street Community Center, additional parking at Union Station, and these other projects that you can see. The remaining project is that reconstruction. We have been collecting those resources, and right now we anticipate having, by the end of this year, approximately $56 million to make available for that project. When we first undertook this in 2013, it was anticipated that the mall reconstruction progress would be much farther along than it is right now. You heard about the processes that had to go through, and so we are out of alignment with the timing under the project funding agreement that would otherwise require the city to submit their final request to Dura by the end of this month, and we would have to expend all the money by the end of 2022. Clearly that time horizon won't work under where we are right now from a procurement standpoint. So what we are asking is to amend those dates to allow for the city to request and submit to Dura their final project by the end of the year in 2022, and then have all of the monies be fully dispersed by the end of 2027. That's the primary objective. The other included in this amendment is to shift the requirement regarding our construction employment opportunities program, no longer have those monies stay at Dura for Dura to then deploy them, but instead have the city be able to work with those same funds to strengthen their construction career pilot. We're not extending the time under which we can capture the tax increment. That has already been determined, and we can't change that at all. Again, it's changing the time under which the city can request resources, as well as who gets to use those CEO monies for the construction career standpoint. And the Dura board is scheduled to consider this project funding agreement at their board meeting day after tomorrow. And with that, then, I'm switching it back to Josh. Thank you.
So this is really just a couple of summary slides, reiteration of the schedule. You will see again back in Q4 of 2020, you will get another action that will have you act on the contract for the design builder. And then in 2021, they'll get a notice to proceed, and construction should begin later in Q3 of 2021. So the legislative actions that you will have before you are item 200560, which is the IGA with RTD to accept those funds, item 200561, which is the IAA with Denver Water to accept those funds into the city, and then, as Tracy mentioned, item 200562, which will amend the project funding agreement to extend the duration. That is all I have.
Great, thank you. Our FinGov meetings usually end at 3. I did ask all council members to be prepared to stay till 3:30. So hopefully we can get everyone's questions asked, and we will start with Councilwoman CdeBaca.
Thank you. I have a few questions. So what is the total cost estimate? We saw the pie, the breakdown, but we don't have a total of what it will cost us and what the gap is.
Yes, so there is no current funding gap. Right? All of this pie represents what we think it could be, and it's slightly over $100 million. We don't have an exact cost estimate to share with contractors because we want them to bid, and when we have their bids, we'll at that point say, are they in alignment with the funds we have? And if they're not, we would have to come in front of you and say, hey, we may need more money, or hey, they came in under and we recommend your approval of the contract.
Okay, and so it sounds like with some of the other transfers, excluding the Dura PFA, that we have enough money to do the underground work necessary on the stormwater piece of this, correct?
So it's a water line, not a stormwater, so it's a water supply line. There's 2 lines, and I don't think that the 5.4 million transfer from Denver Water would solely cover just the replacement of those lines. And let me elaborate to explain why I think that. We have a contract already that we were moving forward with to maintain and replace all of the kind of bad dirt and substrate underneath the pavers. And so we were already going to rip all of that out to repair it. And so if we say, okay, we're already ripping out all these historic pavers, then the money that they need to just replace the water line is just the cost of digging a little deeper to replace those. Whereas if you said, okay, we're not doing the repair of the paver system, now they're going to have to spend more money to get the historic pavers put back and excavate them on their own. Does that make sense?
Kind of, and the frustration here is that I've been asking for the line-by-line breakdown of each expense and what would be covered under, or where it would fit under each funding source, and haven't gotten that. So I think that's the frustration here, but I'll move on to my next question. So the labor, or the section where you guys showed us the benefit, breaks down, direct, indirect, and induced. When was this modeling done, and has there been modeling post-COVID?
I'm going to have to.
So this modeling was done post-COVID, but with a model that does not consider necessarily the last 3 months of our economic situation. We do not have an economic model built that has rapidly shifted to adjust to our new reality. So it is years of historical data, so it would take an ebbs and flows over those past years, but not necessarily the last 3 months.
Got it. And so we have $100+ million project.
Correct.
But the basic emergency or ongoing maintenance costs are about $1.5 million per year, correct? Okay. I think this next question is for Tracy, and you've answered it before, but I would love to have it on record. If the $55 million is not allowed to stay in this savings account, if we vote no on this, the dollars have to be returned to the original taxing entities. Can you tell us what that breakdown is per taxing entity?
Sure. So again, these are estimates because we still have a period of time before the final collections would be made. But we're generally looking somewhere in the $56 to $57 million range. So with that as a baseline, the amount that would potentially be returned to the city and county of Denver, bear with me for a minute, Councilwoman, I want to make sure I'm giving you the correct numbers here, would be to the city between $22 and $23 million, to DPS about $33 million, and to urban drainage about $715,000 or so.
And those dollars would return to each of those respective entities as unrestricted dollars that they could do whatever they choose with, correct?
I am not in a position to know how it works once the monies get back to them, but Dura would have no continuing say on how those monies would be used once they are returned to the original taxing entities.
Awesome. And has there been an assessment of the bio fund? Because this is being based off of the bio fund in my neighborhood that is for I-70. We know in our neighborhood that there are many businesses that will not survive, and the bio fund has largely not worked to sustain our businesses. Can you tell me about this induced and indirect impact and what we're doing to protect those impacts via the biofund?
Councilwoman, I wish I could, but that is not my purview, so I'm looking to see who might be better positioned to answer that question. Emily.
Thank you. So I do want to make sure that I'm sort of separating this economic impact. These are the jobs and the economic activity generated by the project. Then the biofund.
Real quick though,
Yes.
assuming that the current businesses remain there, or assuming new retailers come in, what?
So this is the jobs created on the project, right? That's the direct. The indirect are the jobs down the supply chain. Then to the induced, so a business on the mall, it's basically saying that the induced number of jobs along the mall and or in associated industries from the sales and the purchasing power of that income are created. It does not necessarily get to that is a restaurant on the mall, that is a convenience store on the mall. So this is really the economic generation. Now, the biofund would be a source available to the businesses on the mall during the construction. And I don't know the details exactly of how DIDO would structure that, but it would basically, depending on what we get back from the contractor as far as their approach to construction phasing, whether that be 2 blocks or 6 blocks, that is the impacts, along the businesses. And then DIDO would structure a complementary program for those businesses to access as far as assistance during construction. So 2 sort of different programs.
But based on the assumptions pre-COVID?
The job creation and
just the induced
this is pre-COVID, correct? DIDO would create a model based on their knowledge of how businesses operate and their needs during the construction process.
And so the biofund is not included in the total cost estimate for the project?
Not at this point in time.
Got it.
That would be a complementary program funded out of the operating budget, not necessarily the capital budget.
Got it. So we would have to find those funds. I don't know who this question goes to, but it's a broader question, and it's kind of weaving together the many conversations that we've had today. Judgment and decision making. So we heard Ms. Aldrete talk about how this is an aspirational project. This is a project that we've been studying for many, many years, and so none of those studies are voided by not going forward on the project right now. But we also have a situation where the goals of the project don't match the current conditions. It was stated that this project is about a focus on public life and creating places to be versus pass-throughs. We're in a situation where there's not really an option to congregate in these spaces or a necessity for us to be in these social gatherings that we were used to before COVID. We have $56 million, and $23 million of that is eligible to go immediately back to Denver to be spent on whatever we need in these times of hardship. $33 million to go back to DPS, knowing that they've incurred a lot of costs related to COVID. Why are we choosing to move forward on this project right now instead of returning these TIF dollars to address the immediate needs of the city in a time of crisis with no restrictions at all on those dollars, knowing that we're cutting people, we're furloughing people to make up crumbs of what we have here immediately available to us?
So I think there's a lot there. So give me some time to go through those. I think these funds, as currently structured, are not immediately available. I think they're available in 2.5 years, roughly. So the 23 million and the 33 million become available then. Annually,
Can Tracy answer that definitively? Because that's not my understanding with those 23 million and the 33 million.
So I will do my best on that because it really is a structure of the contract as it exists today. So there is the project funding agreement that is in place between the city and Dura. So right now, that agreement as it exists today would require the city to submit to us their last project request by the end of this month. However, our obligation to fully disperse the money doesn't terminate until the end of 2022. So if nothing else happens with the agreement, we would just continue to have those monies to then be in a position, if something else would happen regarding the expectation of submitting a new project request, until 2022. So the agreement doesn't fully on its face terminate until the end of 2022. So then that's the time horizon that Josh is referencing, that upon that existing contract termination, the funds would be returned.
But if we do not approve that agreement, then when does the money go back?
So we're asking you to approve an amendment to the agreement. If that doesn't happen, there's still that core original agreement that is in place.
Until 2020?
Until 2022, which is the time under which the agreement just straight up terminates.
And so what would be the reason Dura would hold on to those dollars instead of returning them immediately to the city, to the taxing entities?
Because we would still have that baseline contractual obligation that says that we have until the end of 2022 to spend it. So there would have to be some change made to that agreement to change that otherwise existing termination date.
Even with our debts paid off?
Yes, because you would still have the open opportunity for the city to, you'd have to again amend it to allow us to accept new projects, but that could arguably happen before the ultimate termination date of the end of 2022.
And so could the city not amend it to just end it?
You could do that.
Got it.
Yes.
Thank you.
But that again requires an amendment, an action to change the terms of the existing underlying agreement.
Got it. So maybe that's the question for Josh. Why are we not doing that instead?
Okay, and can I just give you a time check? Councilwoman Kniech has been waiting a long time, so if you can be as brief as possible, and then we'll let Councilwoman
I will be
Kniech-
brief.
Okay.
Because if we did that, we would lose roughly $43 million of other people's money that would help pay for a project that has been identified in poor condition, not just aspirational, but we've got a water line from 1888 that's going to have to be replaced, and the $5.4 million doesn't cover that. So we'd be left with an asset that's still in poor condition. We'd give $43 million back to other people that wouldn't be coming into the city. And this is an entity that kicks off about $75 million annually when we invest in it and when businesses are there.
But that is not what was communicated to me when we talked about the terms of each of those dollars coming to us, that they would not have to be returned immediately, that they could be used for improvements on the 16th Street Mall and not the full renovation.
That is not true of the federal transit dollars, the state dollars, and the local partnership dollars.
So what dollars would that leave?
Well, you'd carve out about 30% of that pie.
Okay, and it's 1.5 million to complete the repairs needed
I'm saying
every
you're
year?
giving away more than you're getting back in the TIF.
But you're getting it back for an immediate need.
If you amend the Dura contract.
Correct. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Kniech?
Thank you. One tiny question. Why is, and maybe we just answered it, but why are we saying that the final project submittal date is still going to be the end of 2022 when your construction timeline has construction beginning in 21? So why wouldn't we be amending that date with this amendment if it went forward? I don't want to muddy it with the last conversation, but you're in this case, you have project submittal deadline after you're already under construction. So just why, and maybe it's because you just kept the same date, but.
Am I following that right?
Yes, so there are 2 dates in the PFA. To your point, we have shifted the submittal date. So that is the city going to Dura to make the request for funds. Originally, it is the end of this month. We have pushed it back to 2022, just to give us some buffer, depending on how long negotiations with the design-build contractor take. And who knows, if something comes in wildly under budget, then maybe we could also find another project to get done if there was any remaining TIF funds available.
Okay.
And then we've pushed back the date by which we request reimbursement after that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I want to thank the team for adding the slide about public restrooms, and I'm going to ask a question about it. So I hope it's not too confusing to my colleagues that there's a slide in here about a piece that's not in the project, but in my view, this is an entire transportation community, and you have to think about all of the amenities related to that community, so that, you know, we don't allow bikes on the mall, but in other corridors, that would be bike infrastructure. You know, obviously there's a need for public restrooms in this public realm. So for me, it was uncomfortable to proceed with a conversation about a project that didn't include this component. So that, I appreciate that you put it in here. I want you to talk for a minute about the fact that you have a certain amount of funding that we kind of fought 4 years ago and thought we were going to use sooner than we did. So it's been carried over for a number of budget cycles, preceding some of the staff in this room. But it's not quite enough to pay for 2. So I want you to talk a little bit about the funding gap that you have, and then what the situation is if you can't fill the funding gap before you bring us the design build contract for the rest of the project. And so do you go forward with 1 restroom, or, you know, talk to me about how you see these pieces fitting in given the funding gap.
Sure, I think there's a couple of options there, and maybe we continue to have some conversations after this meeting to figure out what we think the best path forward is. Certainly we know we have enough with the 900,000 to provide at least 1 restroom and, you know, part of another, but nobody wants part of a restroom, you want a whole restroom. So there's a couple of different funding sources we've talked about. If we run into a barrier with CARES Act funding because it has to be expended by January, if we could potentially tap into that as, you know, it's sanitation facilities and hand washing stations, this could qualify for some of that. So that could be one potential source. But, you know, we would have to sit down with finance and go through all the potential funding sources. And I would say we'd want to make sure we have good estimates, well, not good estimates, but bids from the providers, because we've already got our prototype study. So we ought to be able to get to pretty hard numbers pretty quick. And then we can go hunt down if there are additional dollars needed and where we can put those. I would say one option is do one now and then have some rollover savings from the 900,000 and then identify another funding source to move forward with another one, or identify the funding source ahead of time and do 2. I think those are really just the 2 options that you have that we need to solve for before we probably ask you to approve the construction contract.
So I also agree that it's ideal to have bids to understand what things really cost, but I also, our city is not notoriously successful with the speed of our procurement processes, and so I guess how far are you from going to bid right now, and how realistic is it that you would get bids on this small project while you're still making your selection on your you know, obviously then you'd have 2 bid processes going at the same time. And, you know, maybe that one will be slow enough that this one is small and it can, how realistic is it that you'll be able to get to real numbers on the restroom piece before you bring us something on the core mall project? I
think it's very realistic. I'm comfortable saying we can do that. I think we've done enough with the prototype study that we have honed in on, you know, there's probably a handful of providers that can provide what we want, and we ought to be able to have like a quick competitive process with 2 or 3 of them and say, this is what we want. how much will it cost to get it?
And can I just clarify, I learned a lot about all this technology, and it may seem really simple, plop down a Portland loo and everything's great. We, of course, have winter here in Colorado. Will this be a year-round restroom, and is that, in terms of heating to make sure pipes don't freeze? I just want to make sure we have a year-round amenity in the mall. We need year-round complementary amenities, and so I just want to make sure the prototype you're testing is a year-round model.
Yeah, I'm gonna say I need to get back to you on that one, because I haven't been here for all that history, but absolutely, I think that's a good comment. I think it's probably something that we should be able to answer yes to, but I want to make sure we can go back to that study and make sure we can say yes to that.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Yay, bathrooms, and yes, of course, they have to be heated. Councilman CdeBaca, I'm going to go with Councilman Kashmann first, because he hasn't asked a question.
Yeah, it's just quick. Continue with the restroom discussion. It's detailed, but we've learned with big contracts that details matter. It doesn't say we will construct 1 or 2 restrooms. It says we'll construct up to 2. That includes 2, 1, and 0. Is there anything in documents that exist now or by the time we will actually vote on this that assures us that we will have year-round restrooms, 1 or 2?
I don't think that exists today, but I think we can make sure it exists before you vote on moving forward with construction.
It would be important.
Okay. We hear you.
That helps make the 16th Street Mall not just more comfortable for tourists, but more comfortable for other Denver residents.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Is that it?
Yeah,
Yep.
that's it.
Councilman CdeBaca?
Staying on the bathroom conversation, even though this is not part of anything we're authorizing today or the capital stack you presented, how soon will the restrooms be able to be completed
Yeah.
in comparison to the whole project?
Yeah, we'll need to nail down procurement, but our anticipation is we want to get these in before this construction project actually kicks off. So we'd have those service lines going out, they'd replace the main lines, and they'd reattach to our service lines.
And this is, so thank you for that information. And this is information directly connected to the previous presentation about information, prioritization, and judgment and decision-making. I feel like these are two things. The restrooms are something we need immediately. We have $23 million that could potentially be returned to the city to immediately pay for these 2 bathrooms to be done before anything else is happening. And so I strongly encourage you all to consider the immediate needs of the city and not necessarily something that's not making sense for our context right now. Thank you.
I think we should do both.
Great, thank you.
That's a luxury that we don't
Councilman
have.
Hinds?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would thank Councilmember Kniech for her questions, because I was puzzled by this slide, and I would also thank Councilmember Kashmann because 0 is part of up to 2. So I would echo my colleagues in that I think the number should be something other than 0. If we're going to propose it, we should actually propose it. And I think part of our incredulousness is related to the previous conversation about the historic relationship between the executive and legislative branch. So there's nothing against you in specific, or anyone in this room, or anyone who was in the previous presentation. So I would also say a question about, is the city liable if someone were to trip and hurt themselves because of the crumbling infrastructure?
I would have to leave that to the city attorney's office to answer, but I would say in general on our sidewalks we probably are named sometimes, but I think we have limited liability associated with that.
Yeah, I think the responsibility of sidewalks in general are the adjacent property owners' responsibility, but since DDP manages it, I don't know if DDP would be responsible, I don't know, but But I guess where I'm going with this is our infrastructure on the mall is less than perfect, and I know that I have fallen multiple times on the mall. The most recent was as a council member trying to get back to a meeting. This is right before COVID, so this year in 2020, and I would say I am excited that we're going to create an infrastructure that works for everyone, that doesn't. I want our pedestrian infrastructure to be broad and inviting. And if we have an infrastructure that that people are concerned about tripping, as you had mentioned, but for me, it's a larger concern. And once I get out of my chair, like I'm paralyzed from the nipples down, I have to rely on someone else to get me back in the chair, and that's so. I think that the mall is an amazing part of our city. And I recognize my Councilmember CdeBaca as my colleague's concern about spending money now on a project that is in the future. We do have needs now. I think that what you were saying, and I think it has merit, is that we have a water line that is more than 100 years old, and it will break at some point. And we have a pedestrian infrastructure that is also beyond its lifespan. And I don't want to, we talk a lot about the sidewalk infrastructure of the city and how we haven't significantly maintained it in 70 years, and it costs $1 billion for us to replace now. So, and if we keep kicking the can down the road, it'll cost more, and we'll have additional liability. So, I think it's important for us to consider that, and if we can leverage other people's money, I'd rather us not have liability. I'd rather us have an amenity that works for everyone, the people who live here and the people who visit here. So I just wanted to throw in my 2 cents. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I'm looking forward to not having my heels get stuck in between the pavers. All right. Do you all feel comfortable moving these forward in a block?
No.
No, okay. So would someone like to make a motion to move the first agreement with RTD forward?
I'll move the RTD one.
Okay, Councilman.
Second.
All right, and should we do roll call?
Yes.
Okay, Emily, can you do that, please?
Black,
Aye.
Kniech. Councilmember Kniech.
Yes.
Hinds,
Yes.
Gilmore,
Yes.
Ortega, CdeBaca,
Yes.
Clark.
Aye.
The motion passes.
All right, and how about a motion to move the interagency agreement with Denver Water forward?
I'll move.
Councilwoman CdeBaca.
Second.
Chris Hinds.
Black,
Aye.
Kniech. Aye. Hinds,
Aye.
Gilmore,
Aye.
Ortega, CdeBaca,
Aye.
Clark.
Aye.
All right, and would someone like to make a motion to move the final bill to amend the project funding agreement with Dura forward?
So moved.
Second.
Black,
Aye.
Kniech. Aye. Hinds,
Aye.
Gilmore,
Aye.
Ortega, CdeBaca,
No.
Clark.
Aye.
All right, thank you. Thank you all for staying a little late. We do have a special FinGov meeting tomorrow in the biz slot at 1:30. We will have Brendan Hanlon here again to talk about budget reductions as well as a proposal to offer retirement incentives. So thank you all and have a great rest of your Tuesday.